Welcome back into the National Rundown, episode 10. Me and Geono are back here once again for an amazing episode. There is so much to talk about over both of these leagues, and we are going to dive right into the thick of everything. So many great storylines and some really crazy things that we really did not think were going to happen. But as always, I'm going to send it to you, Geono, first and ask you, how do you feel about those Edmonton Elks? I think it's the biggest thing for you this week.
Yeah, man, this is a pretty special time in Edmonton. There's to be honest with you, I don't know how many people had them going 3-0 to start the season. That's been probably the biggest storyline, probably in the CFL and CEBL. That's probably the number one thing we're looking at right now. So much positivity around the Elks right now, and I think it's been a long time. We talked about the last time they were this good. I was in grade 9, and the more and more that we keep going, it's going to get to a younger and younger Geono grade. So I'm excited to see how long that goes. But man, it's exciting to see how great this team is doing, especially in a really tough West Division that hasn't exactly figured it out right now.
Yeah, I mean, things are looking up Edmonton, it seems, not only with the Elks, but with their coherent Stingers. We'll get into all of that, but let's start things off with the National Pulse, putting our finger on the pulse, going coast to coast, and we will start it there with you in the West. What are some of those biggest storylines this week?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that stands out, staying in the CEBL, is just the fact that the Edmonton Stingers won both of their games against the Saskatoon Mamba. That was a game that I think everybody in the league and on the team knew that this was probably going to define their season. If they lost both of them, you may as well wrap it up that Edmonton's going to be fighting for that 4th seed with Calgary. Now the conversation has shifted, and all of a sudden they're back into conversation of potentially the 2nd seed. We'll see how long that goes and how long that becomes a possibility. But right now they're flying. They have momentum, and that's hard to capture. I also look at Winnipeg in 2nd place. They've beat Vancouver, which was really interesting because I think many people were it's the opposite. Vancouver beat them, and I think a lot of people were looking at that to be, what's exactly going to happen? When's Xavier Moon going to get back? How is Vancouver going to adapt with, no Mitch Creek, Tyree Samuel's back. There's so many weird things happening in the Western Conference, especially with Jalen House. No longer with Vancouver. This team, that was a huge game. Yeah. And again, they're still not at full strength, and it's such a weird thing to think about. We still haven't seen both these teams at their full strength in a real matchup. So, I think that's one thing to keep one more eye on. But man, the West is kind of starting to separate itself a little bit. Yeah. I feel like the Mamba might actually be more trending to the 4th seed, and the Stingers may be trending up to the 3rd seed at this point. Just so many weird things that are happening in the CBL, but definitely the one constant has definitely been Calgary. Calgary has been the one constant, ending up at the bottom of the conference. And so far, I don't know if that's going to change, but there is a chance that it will change when they play, the Edmonton Stingers on Canada Day tomorrow, when we're shooting this the day before Canada Day.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions, like you said, I think, around Vancouver. That's one of the biggest things that I've kind of seen this week. Again, changing on a dime, and not only the record, but their actual team is just getting kind of changed on the dime. But getting that win over Winnipeg was pretty big, so that should be a confidence boost. But yeah, I'm curious to see what's going to be kind of the falling out of everything that's going on, and we'll have to see, if they pick up anybody else. But moving forward to the East, lots of exciting stuff here as well. I think the main thing I want to highlight is the Argos getting the win over the Rough Riders this week. That was very big for them, moving themselves into probably a contender in this East, along with the Ticats and the Alouettes. And we're now looking at a little bit of a 3-headed monster. We will see. But moving on, the Red Blacks, they were taking on the Montreal Alouettes, and they came up short, but in my opinion, there's a lot of positives to take away from that game. I think they were competitive. Jake Mayer, had a stat line, and that's something we haven't been able to really say for most of the season. But again, Montreal on the flip side, they got the win, but I'm looking more at them and their defensive woes, and that's raising some questions for me. But we'll get into that later on. Of course, Hamilton had the bye this week, so nothing really going on there. And then in the CEBL, Scarborough, they're 11-2 now. River Lions, they dropped a few, but they're still kind of there. The biggest thing, though, I think for me is Brampton now have lost 5 in a row. They're on a major losing skid. No longer really in that top 2 threat in the East. We're not really considering them as that, two-headed monster with Scarborough. So there's a lot to kind of be had there. And then the BlackJacks, actually, they catapulted themselves right back into the conversation. 2 big wins this week. And now that East, outside of Scarborough, is looking a little bit more, up in the air. And we're going to have a lot to kind of see there. Montreal's in the picture as well. We're going to break it down a lot more, but that's kind of the rough storylines and, the national pulse. So, looking forward now, we'll kind of, transition out of that, and I do want to start in the CFL. Like I started at the top of the show, the Elks, 3-0. That game was interesting. I was able to break it down a little bit on the north of the end zone with Owen as we were going pretty in-depth on the Bombers there, and to me, that game, as much as the Elks won it, it felt like the Bombers had so many costly turnovers, kind of just gifting that game away. What was some of the big takeaways you did see from the Elks, though?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is just that, Justin Rankin is absolutely this team's best player. Game in and game out, I feel like it feels like we've underestimated this guy at some points, which is hard to say. Because, I think he was projected to be one of the best players in the league, coming out of last season. And I think that was really fair. But what we've seen this year is just a total different beast from a guy that in all reality is absolutely lighting up the league. And I read a stat, I can't remember exactly where it was from, but they said that Justin Rankin is going on the best stretch of the CFL running back this season since Corey Sheets in 2013. And obviously, I'll drop some lore for Brady. Like, Corey Sheets is he's a very, very good player. Absolutely one of the best running backs probably in CFL history. He's up there, and I definitely think he's been one of the best players, in recent memory in the CFL. So, when I think about that, I'm like, that pretty much contextualizes where this thing is in terms of his run, and he's obviously just been dominant. That's the straight way to put it. There's nowhere you can look at this team right now and really say, this player's not really making it. Because to be honest with you, a win is a win is a win, right? They all count the same, just the same way of, a loss, whether you lose by 30 or 3, counts the exact same way. And I think with how unlucky Edmonton has been, or just straight up just not good, this is kind of the turning point you'd want to have if you're a part of the Elks, or if you're an Elks fan. This is the moment you've been waiting for. You've been waiting for a time in a team to really put things together and start to put wins together. Because to be honest with you, they weren't far off last year for most of them. They could have very well made the playoffs. I know that's not a conversation many people are willing to have, but it could have happened. But the big thing there is it could. Now it's starting to feel more real. Now it's starting to feel like, okay, it's those small fourth quarter games that this team is able to close out. They didn't do that last year. This year they're doing it, and it's starting to turn around. And it starts with Cody Fajardo, right? This guy, I know we talked about him a lot, going into it. I told him he was going to be the big part of why this team made the playoffs. Now, it was a hot take, and I'm happy to see it's on a good spot right now, but this guy has been really the leader behind it. I think if you put any other quarterback in this situation, there's probably some questions about if they still end up 3-0. I don't know if it would happen. I feel like Cody's the guy for this team. They've been down the road of trying other quarterbacks, and it just hasn't worked. Something's working with Cody Fajardo right now, and I think that's the most interesting part from me. But also, the number one thing I'm really interested too is just the fact of how maybe unexpected the wide receiver room is kind of getting at this point. Yeah. Like Kalen Julian Grant, he's good, don't get me wrong, but is he like a number one wide receiver? I don't necessarily think so. You kind of thought that might be Austin Mack, right? The Montreal connection, but honestly, it hasn't really happened yet. I'm really interested to get your take because you've been big on the Alouettes, man. Like you were really big on them. I think that's fair to say with everything going on. But you look at kind of like that Montreal connection with Austin Mack being there. Are you kind of seeing the same thing I'm seeing with the wide receiver room, that it's like nobody really here stands out as the number one, but right now they're getting the job done.
Yeah, no, I fully agree, and I think honestly, I could probably name like 3 to 4 better, wide receiver rooms in the CFL. And it's kind of weird to me because, none of these guys are really standing out. Julian Grant, cool, he had a solid game. But yeah, I felt that Mac should probably have, went into this number one role. But again, I think it's more so just, Fajardo's just doing his job, and as much as he's using his wide receivers well, he's just being so timely with it. He's making all the right decisions. And like you said, I really don't think they would be 3-0 with any other quarterback because he's just played it absolutely perfectly. And he's done, he's put his heart and soul into these first 3 games. And if this continues throughout the season, they are definitely, able to make a good run in these playoffs. So
I agree.
The Elks are definitely looking great. I mean, on the flip side, with those Bombers, broke it down pretty in depth, on the north of the end zone. But for me, like I said at the top, it was probably, just the turnovers that cost them. But now they're moving to 1-2. They got a big matchup with Hamilton coming up this week. And that one, I feel, is one of those games where they needed a lot more than Hamilton does. And I think it's going to be one of those where, this West is looking good. And when you can say that BC is the worst team in this conference at the moment, that is something to be said, and that's something to be really scared of. So, Winnipeg's going to need this win for sure. But moving forward to those BC Lions, they fall to 0-3 now. That big game against the Stampeders where, they just couldn't get the lead. And, one of my big keys going into that game for Calgary was starting off strong because they've been playing these teams so close, but the starts have been the issue. They started off great, had the lead the whole game, never really gave it back. And, it just felt like Calgary wanted it more. It just felt like in the bigger moments, they were the ones able to do the job. And, Rourke's stat line, he had all those yards, but again, it felt like a lot of those stat pad yards, and it wasn't really, transparent of what the actual, outcome was. So, curious what you think of BC in that game. Do you think that they can turn this around coming out of this game?
Yeah, I think there's a conversation for it to obviously be, if you were pinpointing where that you would expect them to almost be a gimme win. Kind of felt like it was going to be this game. Obviously, the tables have turned, and it's actually Edmonton really feels like the favorite in this one. To me, I've got to be honest. We've talked so much about, especially in the CEBL, about like a team like Edmonton or somebody else like Winnipeg just being able to stop the run and say, hey, we lost the game. Like especially like Montreal, they lost the game, but they came back, right? They lost Edmonton, and sure, Davis Alexander's had a pretty easy ride in his regular season. He's never had to deal with that. When that happened, I was really interested. I'm like, how do you respond? Because that's the big thing, not only with just champions, but a good team. A good team does not let us a one-game thing turn into a 3 or 4 game slide. And that's where BC is right now. They're in that territory of being, an 0-4 team when you could have a 4-0 team. There's only 2 spots guaranteed in the East pretty much outside of the number 1, right? I got to look at it. If Edmonton hits 4-0, like it's pretty much like that. They're going to make the playoffs at that point.
Yeah.
You just look at everything else and you're like, okay, Saskatchewan's probably going to be there. And then you're fighting with Calgary and Winnipeg to be able to get into that spot. You cannot lose this game if you're BC. But I think where this just kind of stems from, this conversation would be totally different if they won that week 1 game in Saskatchewan. Am I a little bit cautious about the fact that they lost only by 2 or 3. Like, they did not lose by a huge margin. And all of a sudden, it's kind of led into this 0-3 start. I'm a little bit concerned about that. I've been a really big, BC Lions, fan and all that stuff. Owen definitely agrees with that part. But it feels like there's that, just something maybe missing, that they've been able to allow this to go from, hey, we were close in week 1, let's go rebound in week 2. You can't get it there, but you were kind of close. In week 3, it just kind of feels like weird. It's like, you just got to get one, but that's where I'm a little bit more concerned. You'd figure out if you'd lost the first 2 in such a close fashion that you were going to get it done in week 4 against a team that was also in a similar situation. That's what really kind of makes me a little bit cautious about this BC team right now. I know they have the pieces. I think the talent is there. It's just, do they have the mentality to get the shit back to the right path, which they need to? That I'm a little bit unsure about right now.
Yeah, I don't know if they can do it, but like you said, this game, and I said this on the north of the end zone, this is the panic game for me. Like, if we don't win this game, it is looking very bleak. This West is looking so tough this season, especially, and if you go to 0-4, you're sitting at 5th in the conference. You need to get 4th just to have a shot at maybe crossing over. It is tough, man. It's going to be a really big hill to climb. So, this game is gigantic for the Lions. And, as much as it would be great for the Elks to go 4-0, they're still in a great spot no matter what. So, we'll have to see. But, again, they might put the nail in the coffin of these Lions, and that would be quite interesting.
Yeah, and that's the weird part, too, right, is that usually there's that post, firing your coach bump that, some teams have it. The Calgary Surge did not have that, but, 90% of the time it does happen. I'm interested to see, they fired their special teams coordinator. I'm going to butcher this name, but his name's Corey McDermott. If I butchered that, I apologize. That's right, but I feel like it might be right. If I did, tip to the cap, but if not, we do apologize. I think that this is more of an interesting move. Like, I don't remember who it was on the panel. It might have been Sanchez, but he talked about, you can't move the furniture around in the room. Like, it might just be the bad furniture. And I think that resonated with a lot of people because, firing your special teams coordinator is not exactly a huge shot across the bow that you're panicking. But it says something. And I don't know if this fixes all their problems. I know, everybody probably is kind of talking about, like, what's the move behind this. I know the special teams was not the best in Kelowna that game, but I wonder if there is more people on the hot seat now that they fired their special teams coordinator. You definitely feel like, you've watched a lot of football. Do you kind of get that sense too? Like, are we kind of on the same page here? Like, I feel like somebody else is on the hot seat. I don't know who.
It's probably like a little bit of a warning sign, and it's like, we're throwing the first shot, but it's not going to be too much. We're not going to go overboard, but we're kind of like sending a little bit of a statement there. I think it could be, you got to probably look at your defensive side of the ball, I think.
I agree.
Special teams, I don't think was probably like the biggest issue. It never really is unless it's, going terribly wrong.
I agree.
But I think it could be on the defensive side of things. We'll have to see though, because the offense, it really couldn't be that bad, especially with Buck Pierce. Like, even as
I agree.
He's your OC, but he's your head coach who has spent all this time in Winnipeg, being the guy, being the OC, taking them to Grey Cups. So it's like, that can't be your issue. It's got to probably resign on the defensive side of things. But
I agree. Like, and that's the thing too. Like, you give up 41 against Calgary last week, and then you give up, last week 41 against Hamilton. And we know Hamilton is a good team, right? And we know Calgary has that high explosive offense. But it really feels like it's the defense that is lacking right now.
Exactly.
And I do think that the offense has to take some part of the blame. Like, you do. Like, your defense might put you in a bad situation, but sometimes you need to go bail out your defense. Same way that, the defense needs to bail out the offense sometimes. Maybe Rourke throws a bad, interception, and he's like, hey, I need you guys to get me the ball back. It's kind of a give and take, and I think, it's more of a team thing, but I think right now the most glaring issue is this team's defense. How that kind of stacks up against an Edmonton team that's, they scored 32, they scored 23, and then what was the score in Ottawa? 29. Like, this is a weird situation where, if BC gets to that, 30 point, which they've been doing, like, it feels like on paper they should be able to win. But this is a different defense. This is a team that's riding on momentum versus a team that's ice cold. I'm interested to see what happens here.
Yeah, I think we've probably covered it all there. Like, the biggest thing is, walking away from this, you got to win this game. And
I agree.
If you win this game, then we're going to have definitely a more stern conversation, I would say, about them. But
100%.
It's definitely very close to panicking. Like I said with the Surge, like, I was almost off that cliff and I fell off. Here, I'm like, I'm barely hanging on. I got one hand up there still, but I'm hoping they can pull me back up, but we will see. Moving forward into that, I do want to talk quickly about the Montreal-Ottawa game because I have a lot of opinions about Montreal, and how much I've supported them in the season. But, the big thing for me is I do need to see more from their defense, and I think that the biggest thing that's, taking them out of these games, because their offense is playing great. Davis is playing great. Philpott, big 200-yard game, right? And Snead, another touchdown, 80 yards. So the issue is definitely on the defense. They've been giving up so many points, and especially to Ottawa and Jake Mayer, you're giving 35 points.
Yeah.
Man, it's ridiculous. And you were up 21-6 in this game, and you got to put them away, right?
I agree. Ottawa. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just kind of like my frustration towards them. Do I think they'll figure it out? I really hope so, and I think they will. But for me, Montreal, a little upset. On the other side, Ottawa, like I kind of said at the start, I'm really optimistic if I'm Ottawa. Coming out of this game, you know, Owen mentioned this on the north of the end zone that they had cut down their play calling in half. So they simplified things a lot. And they were going out here just to, probably get Mayer some confidence. He just, got the first starting spot from Drew Brown. He's no longer an option there. So he's going to have a lot of opportunity and no longer needs to look behind his shoulder. And he went out there and had a pretty solid game. So for Ottawa, I think I would be happy that you were competitive in this game. And you're not going to do much this season. So to go out there, see some positives, and still, get a loss is probably best case scenario, I'd say.
I agree. I agree with you too, because there's a lot of things. I watched that game and I had to write a column on that game, and I think the big thing that stood out to me is just the number that they're giving up on defense, like for points allowed. Yeah. I want to read you something. Okay, so on week 1, they gave up to so this is Montreal. They gave up 27 to Hamilton in week 1, right? Yeah. Then in week 2 they gave up 30 to Toronto. Then week 3 they gave up 32 to Edmonton, and then last week in week 4 they gave up 35. This is a steady increase, and as much as you may want to say, well, it's only 2-3 points at a time. Like, you need to lower that points a lot. You cannot keep that up. Like, that has to come down at a certain point. I don't know when that exactly would have been. I felt like it was this Ottawa game really presented a good opportunity to do that. Instead, it was the reverse. And I think that's a little bit concerning when you think about the fact of, you're going into a bye, you're going to play Calgary. That's probably the best case scenario to be able to say, hey, this is a chance to right the ship, fix the tweaks. That's probably the bye pretty much could not have come at a better time for Montreal, to be honest with you. But I think that's what's really shocking on my behalf, because I think there's a conversation here about, is this just Jake Mayer being good and maybe, they figured out the Montreal defense, or is this the Montreal defense just not playing good? Because Jake Mayer had his best game of the season by far. He threw for 336 yards, 3 passing touchdowns. That's, I believe, more than all he's had all season so far. Like, this guy almost topped his previous 2 performances in one game. I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like there's something to be said to be like, if this was earlier on, I might be less concerned. But the fact of the matter is like, Ottawa did not play good against Edmonton, and I think that there's something here, maybe Jake Mayer being the test to be like, where does Montreal's defense kind of line up? I think there's something wrong here, and I don't know where. I don't know, again, if it's a certain player you can point to. They had a late game, kick return, like touchdown. I'm like, how does that happen? If you're BC, you're firing your special teams coordinator for that. But it feels like that's a weird situation, right? Where it's like, maybe the score's a little bit misleading, but at the same time, like, Ottawa could have won that game if they would have gotten the onside kick. This is a different game, and all of a sudden we are really panicking about Montreal. I think that it's just maybe a little bit too close of a win for me to really be like, yeah, you guys are doing fine heading into the bye, but there's something there with the defense that they need to tweak, because you can't keep allowing that many points each week and expect to win.
Yeah, I think the bye is going to be huge for them, kind of reset a little bit. Your offense is great, but this will give you some time to really, address those defensive issues.
I agree.
It's going to be a big game coming off that bye against Calgary. That'll be interesting. It is at home, which is nice. So you got all the right, tools,
right
to
circumstances,
go and figure it out. So that'll be interesting for Ottawa. Again, like you said, I'm not really reading too much into the Mayer performance. Like, as much as it was great and probably a confidence booster, we got to see more from him, right?
We do need to see more.
There's so much that they've put into him now, especially by trading Drew Brown. Like, that you're saying this is your guy for the season, most likely, unless something crazy happens or a move, whatever. But at the moment, that is your guy. So I want to see a lot more from Mayer in this. And, really this next week against Saskatchewan could be a really big chance to prove and make a statement. Yeah. So that would flip things around. But yeah, I'm not reading too much into it, especially against the Montreal defense. But yeah,
I agree.
And then last probably game we should touch on here. We got to talk about the Argos. I know Owen's not here, but man, he was having a field day with those Argos.
Yeah,
they played really well against the Riders, man, and they earned that one. So I'll start with you. Was this, just a statement performance for the Argos? Are we really kind of on that train now that they're a third contender in the East?
I think so. I think this has really opened my eyes. I don't know how many people really thought, I think we had Toronto really down the power rankings. And to be honest with you, it's because, again, I thought the Elks were probably going to be really good. I did not expect the Lions to really be this bad. Same thing with the Stamps. But, man, there's just something here with Chad Kelly that I think I was telling you, this guy might be a secret weapon. Obviously, he was the MLP. He's been there, done that. But this team, really, he's their X factor. Yeah. I think there's just something about this guy that really makes this team click, because if you're scoring 40 points, you're doing something right in CFL football, right? If you're doing that consistently game in, game out, I don't care how you do it. Nobody cares how you do it. It's just how if you can do it is the big thing. And Chad Kelly has that right now with the Toronto Argonauts. I don't think enough people have really given them their props. Again, I feel like we were still thinking Hamilton, Montreal. Toronto was the afterthought, and now they're starting to creep into the conversation that we have three really good contenders out of the East, and all of a sudden the West looks a little bit like they have a mess right now. Obviously we've been back and forth on the Hamilton-Montreal train. Do you kind of feel like that Toronto's into that conversation now that we can both, me coming from Hamilton, you coming from Montreal, do you feel like we can welcome the Toronto Argonauts into that thing to say, hey, I think these guys are legit?
Yeah, I think we can for multiple reasons. I mean, for personal reasons, it's great because now Owen's in on the conversation too. But
yes.
I think, in all honesty, Toronto is definitely earned their way into that conversation. And, Chad Kelly has shown that he's going to be the cornerstone here, and he's going to, will his guys to victory when they need it, right? And he's going to put out – he's shown he can put out these, big performances, week in and week out. So – that's definitely huge. It's probably going to come down again. This seems to be the biggest thing is defense, right? If your defense can help win you games and give your offense great positioning, great, chances to go out and there and do it, that's going to be the biggest thing for me.
I agree. I think that's
I'll mention Owen was very high on Tyler Common, and he had a really good game. 89 yards, 2 touchdowns, 5 receptions.
Yeah.
They've got some pieces, and it seems like it's probably starting to kind of fizzle out. But again, it's not like a wide receiver room that jumps out to you on paper. But I think it's one that Chad Kelly is really brewing some confidence in.
Yeah, that's what can happen when you have such a leader at a veteran leader at quarterback. A guy who's been there, done that. Just puts up results, man. And I think we talked about this on, a little bit about if Mike Miller might be the real quarterback, whisperer, and maybe it wasn't Ryan Dinwiddie. I think that's a conversation. I think looking at where we were kind of putting Toronto and Ottawa, to be honest with you, I probably would have expected Ottawa to maybe do a little bit better than, Toronto, because, just all the new that Toronto was going through. I think, just looking at Ryan Dinwiddie, I also expected Drew Brown to be starting. So let's put that out there first. I did not expect it to be Jake Mayer, but I definitely think that's been a big conversation. This is now a conversation about, where do these teams kind of figure it out, right? Because obviously they all can't be in first. Somebody needs to go first, second, third. And that third spot could also be a crossover team. And that math gets messy late in the season. So we can't really say, the third seat's locked up in the East. But it's starting to feel like it. It means we're going to actually have to find out who's the leader. Who's the one that's going to separate themselves. To be honest with you, I'm still going to go with my pick. I'm probably going to say it's going to be Hamilton, but I know you're probably going to say Montreal. I think Toronto I think they just need to prove it a little bit more. If they beat Calgary, I start to believe in it a little bit more. I think there's just, again, it just takes time to really feel this thing out. My early inclination, though, is that Toronto might really be into it if they win that Calgary game. Because right now, this means we're going to have a tight playoff stretch. And to be in week 5 and be able to say that we're going to have a long playoff stretch going through the dog days of the summer really makes it important. Because once you get to Labor Day, those games really matter. Like, people might get a little bit more distracted with the NFL being on and the NHL being back, but this probably means we're going to have some good games in the East down the road. And I think that really just results in good TV for football fans. It helps be able to say, hey, we have teams in it late. I'm sure it will help with attendance. I'm really just thinking, I'm like, yeah, do you kind of feel like this is going to be the trend for the rest of the season? Is, Toronto's going to be right there, Montreal's going to be right there, and Ottawa's going to be not Ottawa, Hamilton's going to be right there. Like, do you feel like that group is just going to kind of stay, not really separate? They're just going to be in that same pack for majority of the season at this point.
Yeah, I feel like I can definitely see them all kind of trading wins, going back and forth. But I think it's going to make a really good, end of season, stretch going into the playoffs. And I think it's going to make a really good episode, breaking the three of them down with kind of, we each have a little bit of stock in it. That's going to be a good episode for sure. But early inclinations.
Yeah.
I would say I'm giving the edge at the current moment probably to Hamilton still, but I think after the bye, Montreal could really get the rest, figure it out. If I like what I see in that first game out against the Stamps, we definitely are right back in first, in my opinion.
I like that because it's funny because everybody, the sentiment after week one in that Hamilton Montreal game, I don't know if you remember it, but the big thing was that the Ticats collapsed in the second half, and now we're talking about Montreal's defense being there. So I'm like, that's a good one. I remember, I think in week 6 there's a matchup between these two teams again, so we're gonna keep a good eye on that one. That really feels like maybe a good chance to see whose defense might be worse or better at some level. It might be even week 7. I'm off the top of my mind, but that's a really interesting part. If Hamilton and Montreal's defenses really both don't figure it out, it just becomes the battle of the offenses and who makes less mistakes. So I'm really excited to see it between those two teams. I still feel like they're the two teams, but I'm ready to bring Toronto into it, especially if they beat Calgary I think it's on Thursday. It's the day after Canada Day, which is going to be a great game. I'm really excited to see how that one goes because it's never a bad thing when the East teams start really giving the West teams a run for their money. If Calgary teams that's 1-2 can battle it out with a team that's 2-1, I think that might prove a little bit of clarity between the two conferences. But right now, it's going to be a big one, especially if the Argos can come away with the win against the Stamps.
I think it would be I would love to see the East just kind of stuff that 4th West team right out of the playoffs. Like that would just be a nice little omen to say, hey, we're the East and we're actually good, right? So
well, it's just been so long since that's the weird thing is that everybody's like, oh yeah, the West is so good, but almost all the Grey Cup champions since the 2020s have started have been from the East, right? You think about Winnipeg obviously being there, but then 2022 it was the Argos. 2023 it was the Alouettes. 24 it was the Argos again, and then 25 it was the Riders. And Montreal was right there. They could have easily done it again. And we're talking about the West only has one title, but right now the East is up 3-2. So I think that's the interesting part of this whole conversation is where does it exactly go. And again, that's something we'll be able to talk about as we get later into the season. Is who's going to take it home. But I think that's the big storyline we're watching in the East right now. Is it's just too early to tell right now.
Yeah, there's so much to be said, and I mean, if you want to look at it further, go ahead and look at the north of the end zone because we're going to be breaking it all down there. But I think we should move forward into the CEBL now. That is all for our free version of the National Rundown. If you enjoyed that, go subscribe to our Insiders portion. For only $2.99 a month, you can get our debates, news, headlines, and more. So make sure you go do that ASAP, and we will see you in the next one.